The sting of her hand still burned across my cheek when she leaned in so close I could feel her hot breath. My own daughter-in-law, someone I had welcomed into my family, someone I had fed and clothed when times were hard, looked me dead in the eyes and hissed, "Give me the deed to this house, or else." My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I was 72 years old, and in all my life, no one had ever struck me like that. The slap came without warning, the sound echoing through the quiet living room, breaking every bond of love I thought still tied us together. My hand went to my cheek, my skin hot and trembling, but I could barely react before she raised her hand again, her eyes blazing like she had already decided this house was hers. I whispered her name, but she didn't flinch. Her voice grew louder, sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Don't play dumb with me. Hand it over. The papers. Now." Can you imagine your own child's spouse turning on you like this? The very person you trusted suddenly treating you like an enemy? Have you ever been betrayed so deeply by someone you thought was family? Tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that sting. Before I go further, take a second to subscribe. Stories like this are not easy to hear, but they are real, and they matter. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what I'm about to tell you will leave you shaking. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I want to see how far this story reaches. She stood over me, breathing hard, waiting for me to move, to submit. I could barely form words, my voice quivering, but my mind screamed 1,000 questions at once. How did we get here? How could kindness be repaid with violence? And most importantly, what on earth would happen if I said no? But before I give you that answer, let me take you back to how it all began. My name is Evelyn. I was born in the small town of Greenville, where people still wave to each other from their porches and bake pies when a new family moves in next door. Life was never easy for me, but I always believed in kindness. My late husband, Richard, used to tell me, "Evelyn, the world doesn't need more money or power. It needs more people who care." When Richard passed, this old house became my everything. It held the laughter of our children, the smell of fresh bread from our kitchen, the squeak of the old swing set in the backyard. Every brick had a memory. It wasn't just a house, it was the last piece of him I had left. That's why when my son, Marcus, married a young woman named Vanessa, I opened my doors wide. I thought, now my family is growing. More love will live under this roof. Vanessa came from a harder life, and I knew she carried her scars, but I believed patience and love could heal anyone. At first, things were gentle. She smiled shyly, helped me in the kitchen, and called me Mom. I remember thinking to myself, maybe Richard is watching from above, smiling at how life continues. But as weeks turned to months, I began to notice small cracks in her kindness. She grew impatient when asked to help, snapped at Marcus for little things, and eyed the house with a gaze that felt less like gratitude and more like calculation. At family dinners, she'd ask odd questions. "So, what happens to the house when, you know?" She'd trail off, pretending to laugh, but I felt the coldness behind the words. I brushed it aside. That's what mothers do. We hope for the best. I told myself she was adjusting. That love takes time. I reminded myself of Richard's words about kindness. But deep inside, something unsettled me. One evening, I sat knitting by the window when I overheard Marcus and Vanessa arguing on the porch. Her voice was sharp. "We can't keep living like this. That house should already be ours." My breath caught. Marcus tried to calm her, but her words pierced me like knives. Still, I told myself, be patient. Empathy is stronger than anger. I invited her to walk with me to church one Sunday, hoping faith could ease her spirit. She smiled politely, but when the sermon was over, she whispered, "The only thing I'm praying for is that this house comes into our name soon." I shivered then. That was the first time I realized the home I treasured was no longer safe from within. And then, Everything boiled over that night. The night of the slap. She stormed into my living room after Marcus had left for work. I was sitting quietly, sorting through old photographs of Richard and the children. Without warning, her hand came across my face, the photos scattering to the floor. "Enough waiting," she shouted. "Sign the deed over to me now." Tears stung my eyes, not from the pain but from the betrayal. The girl I had embraced like a daughter was demanding the very soul of my life. I tried to speak, but my lips trembled too much. And then, before I could answer, something happened that made the ground beneath me feel like it was crumbling. Before I could even gather my breath, the front door creaked open, and Marcus walked in. My son, tired from a long shift at work, froze at the sight before him. His wife standing over me, her hand still raised, my face flushed from the sting of her slap, and the photos of our family scattered like fallen leaves on the carpet. For a moment, time stood still. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Marcus's eyes darted from me to Vanessa, confusion twisting across his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice heavy, his chest rising and falling faster than usual. Vanessa's expression shifted instantly, her fury folding into a mask of innocence. She dropped her hand and bent quickly, pretending to gather the photos. "Oh, Mom just slipped," she said, her voice suddenly soft, almost sweet. "I was helping her pick these up." I stared at her, speechless. How easily the lie rolled off her tongue. My lips trembled, but the words refused to come. I wanted to cry out, to tell Marcus the truth, but I could see the weight of his exhaustion. I could see the way Vanessa clutched his arm, her grip firm, guiding his eyes away from my red cheek and toward the floor. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, you've got to be more careful," he muttered. "You know how much these memories mean." He bent down to help Vanessa with the photographs, his back turned to me, trusting her word over the pain written on my face. The betrayal cut deeper than the slap itself. My own son, my boy who once ran to me crying after scraping his knees, who once swore he would always protect me, looked at me now with doubt. I forced a small smile, whispering, "Yes, I slipped." My voice cracked, but Marcus didn't notice. He simply nodded and hugged Vanessa as if nothing had happened. My heart sank as I realized I was alone in this battle, at least for now. The days that followed moved slowly, heavy with silence. Vanessa barely spoke to me, except in short, sharp commands. She treated the house as though it already belonged to her, rearranging furniture, opening drawers that weren't hers, even talking about knocking down the old garden shed Richard had built with his own hands. Each time she mentioned fixing or changing something, my chest tightened. It wasn't about the walls or the furniture. It was about the memories, the life carved into this home that she wanted to erase. But I stayed quiet. I swallowed the pain and busied myself with simple things, watering the plants, baking bread, and visiting neighbors. Yet even in those small joys, the fear of what she might do next lingered like a shadow. I tried to convince myself that patience and kindness might soften her heart. One morning, I made her favorite pancakes with strawberries and cream. I set them on the table with a smile, hoping to bridge the gap. She looked at the plate, then at me, her lips curling into a smirk. "I don't need your little offerings," she sneered. "Just remember, the sooner you hand that deed over, the easier this will be for everyone." My hands trembled as I picked up the empty plate and walked back to the kitchen. I felt my knees grow weak, and I leaned against the counter, whispering to myself, "Richard, if you can see me, please, guide me." But peace was never meant to last. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the walls, I heard voices rising from the porch again. Marcus and Vanessa were arguing, louder this time. "You don't understand," Vanessa hissed. "We can't wait forever. That house should be ours now. You need to talk to her." Marcus tried to calm her. Vanessa, please, this is my mother we're talking about. It's her house, her memories. Can't we just— No, she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. If she doesn't give it to us, I'll find a way to make her. The words froze my blood. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My son was caught between love and loyalty, and I could see him breaking under the weight of it. And then it happened. Vanessa spotted me standing by the window, listening. Her eyes narrowed, her face twisted with anger, and before Marcus could stop her, she stormed inside. She rushed up to me, her footsteps pounding the floor. Her finger jabbed at my chest as she screamed, "Stay out of our business! If you keep spying on us, you'll regret it!" Marcus stepped in, grabbing her arm, but it was too late. The venom in her words had already pierced my heart. My hands shook, and tears blurred my vision. And just as I thought the night couldn't get worse, Vanessa wrenched free from Marcus's grasp, turned toward the cabinet where Richard's important papers were kept, and lunged for it, determined to take what wasn't hers. Her hand gripped the cabinet handle with such force that the old wood groaned. My heart leapt into my throat. That cabinet was more than furniture. It was the place Richard had built with his own hands, the place where all our most important documents rested, the insurance papers, old letters, and yes, the deed to the house. "Vanessa, stop!" I cried, rushing forward. My knees shook beneath me, but I forced myself toward her. Marcus stepped between us, his arms outstretched. "Vanessa, this is crazy. You can't just go through her things." But she shoved him aside with surprising strength. The cabinet door swung open, papers spilling onto the floor like a storm of memories. My breath caught as I saw the corner of a brown envelope slip from the stack. I knew what it was. I dropped to my knees, my hands scrambling over the scattered papers, my body trembling as I shielded them with my arms. "No," I whispered fiercely, tears burning in my eyes. "This house is all I have left of your father. You will not take it from me." Vanessa's face twisted in rage. She crouched down, yanking at the papers, her nails scratching against the skin of my hands. "You're selfish," she screamed. "You're old. You don't need this place. We need it more than you ever could." For the first time in years, my voice rose like thunder. "This is not just a house. This is my life, my blood, my sweat, my love. You will not destroy it." Marcus stood frozen, torn between the two women he loved most in the world. His voice cracked as he pleaded, "Stop it! Please, both of you!" But the struggle only grew fiercer. Vanessa pulled harder, her eyes wild. The sound of ripping paper filled the air, one of Richard's old letters tearing apart in her hands. My heart shattered. And then, as if fate intervened, the front door burst open. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, holding a plate of cookies wrapped in foil. She had come to drop them off as she often did in the evenings, but instead of warmth, she stepped into chaos. Papers strewn across the floor, me crouched down crying, Vanessa's face red with fury, and Marcus pale with helplessness. Mrs. Peterson gasped. "What on earth is happening here?" The room froze. Vanessa stiffened, her grip loosening on the papers as she realized someone else had seen her in this state. She quickly stood, brushing her hair back, her voice trembling but sharp. She's confused. Evelyn doesn't know what she's doing anymore." Her words sliced through me. Confused? She wanted to paint me as a frail old woman losing her mind, someone unfit to manage her own home. Mrs. Peterson looked from Vanessa to me, her sharp eyes narrowing. She had lived next door for 30 years. She knew me better than that. Quietly, she bent down, helping me gather the papers with gentle hands. "I think Evelyn knows exactly what she's doing," she said firmly. Vanessa's jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. She had been caught, her mask slipping. Later that night, after Mrs. Peterson had left and the house was quiet again, I sat alone in my room with the papers stacked neatly in a box beside me. My hands trembled as I touched the envelope containing the deed. It felt heavier than ever, as if it carried not just ink and signatures, but my entire future. I wanted to believe Marcus would stand by me, that blood would be stronger than manipulation. But as I replayed his silence in my mind, I wasn't sure. Sleep did not come easy. I kept hearing Vanessa's words echoing, "You're old. You don't need this place." And yet, deep in my chest, I felt a fire awaken. I was old, yes, but I was not weak. The next morning, I rose early, determined to find some peace. I put on Richard's old sweater, the one that still carried his faint scent, and stepped out into the garden. The air was crisp, the grass cool beneath my slippers. For a brief moment, I felt safe again, surrounded by the flowers I had planted with my own hands. I picked a rose, its thorns pricking my skin. I whispered to myself, "Kindness is strength, Evelyn. Hold on." But just as I turned to head back inside, I saw a shadow at the kitchen window. Vanessa stood there watching me, her eyes cold and unblinking. And then, with a deliberate slowness, she lifted her phone, snapped a picture of me in the garden, and smirked. My stomach turned to ice. What was she planning to do with that picture? The next morning, the air inside Margaret's home felt unusually heavy. She had barely slept, her mind circling endlessly around the slap, the sharp sting on her cheek, and the words that followed. "Give me the deed to this house." She moved about her kitchen slowly, almost mechanically, setting the kettle to boil while the clock ticked loud and steady on the wall. The sound of it reminded her of footsteps marching towards something she didn't yet understand. She wrapped her hands around her mug, staring into the steam as though it might hold answers. Her son, Daniel, had left for work early, his usual rushed goodbye making her wonder if he even noticed the tension in the house. Or maybe he had noticed, but chose silence, his way of avoiding conflict. That was the hardest part for Margaret. The man she raised, the boy who once promised he'd never let anyone hurt her, seemed blind to the cruelty that now sat under his roof. She tried to shake the thought off. She had promised herself she wouldn't become bitter. After all, bitterness was like poison. It destroyed the vessel that carried it before it ever harmed anyone else. So she whispered a prayer under her breath, asking for strength, asking for peace. Later that afternoon, Emma reappeared in the kitchen, acting as though nothing had happened the night before. She was humming, scrolling on her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. Margaret couldn't help but notice how calm she looked, as though she had rehearsed her role in this house. Sweet when others were watching, sharp as a blade when no one else was around. "Good morning, Margaret," Emma said with that practiced smile. "I hope you slept well?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to respond kindly, but the memory of that slap still burned, so she said nothing. Instead, she poured her tea and walked slowly toward the window, trying to let the sunshine distract her. Emma tilted her head, smirking. "Silent treatment? That's fine. But don't forget, this house will be mine soon enough. You might want to get used to being cooperative." Margaret's heart raced at those words. She turned, clutching her cup so tightly her fingers ached. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Emma only laughed, flipping her hair over her shoulder, and walked away. That laugh lingered long after Emma had left the room. Margaret tried to calm herself, but questions flooded her mind. Why was Emma so certain about owning the house? Did Daniel know about this? Or worse, was he in on it? By evening, Margaret tried to distract herself with her small garden. She pulled weeds, watered her roses, and allowed the soil to slip through her fingers. The earth had always been her comfort. It reminded her of her husband, who had planted the first rosebush when they bought the house 40 years ago. "This will be our forever place," he had said then, and Margaret had believed him. But as she worked among the flowers, her neighbor, Mrs. Turner, called out from across the fence. "Margaret, you look pale. Everything all right?" Margaret forced a smile. Just a little tired, that's all. Mrs. Turner tilted her head, clearly unconvinced, but chose not to press further. Instead, she told Margaret about her grandson's baseball game and the cookies she had baked that morning. The normalcy of that conversation was a relief, and for a while, Margaret almost forgot about the storm waiting inside her house. Almost. When she returned indoors, the storm hit harder than she could have imagined. She walked into the living room only to find Emma standing by her late husband's locked cabinet, the one that held his old files, letters, and property papers. Emma had a key in her hand, one Margaret had never seen before. Her heart stopped. "What are you doing?" Margaret gasped, her voice trembling. Emma turned slowly, her eyes glinting with something cold. "Looking for what's already mine." The key turned with a sharp click. Margaret froze in the doorway, terror and disbelief mixing inside her chest. And just as the cabinet creaked open, revealing the first hint of the documents inside, the front door slammed shut. Daniel's footsteps echoed through the hall. Emma snapped the cabinet closed, hiding the key behind her back. But Margaret had seen enough. Her world was no longer safe. This house, her memories, her very life's work, was under attack. And the worst part? The enemy wasn't outside. It was right there in her own living room. Daniel stepped into the living room, loosening his tie and tossing his briefcase onto the sofa, his expression worn from another long day at the office. He didn't notice the tension at first. Emma standing too stiffly near the cabinet, Margaret frozen by the doorway, her teacup trembling in her hands. "Evening?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. Traffic was a nightmare. Emma, quick as ever, slipped the key into her pocket and plastered on a wide smile. "Welcome home, honey. I was just straightening things up in here. Your mom and I were talking about reorganizing the space, weren't we, Margaret?" Margaret's lips parted, her heart screaming for her to speak, to tell Daniel what had just happened. But fear wrapped its fingers tightly around her throat. If she said too much now, would he believe her? Or would he take Emma's side, blinded by the woman he had chosen to marry? Daniel glanced between them, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Everything okay?" "Yes, dear," Emma said sweetly, gliding across the room to kiss him on the cheek. "Everything's fine." Margaret forced a smile, but her hands betrayed her, shaking as she tried to set her teacup down on the table. The cup rattled against the saucer, the sound far too loud in the silent room. Daniel frowned. "Mom?" Margaret quickly shook her head. "I'm fine, Daniel. Just a little tired." Emma's eyes lingered on her, sharp and triumphant, as though daring Margaret to expose her. The evening dragged on in silence. Daniel turned on the television, flipping through channels, while Emma curled beside him, laughing at the jokes on screen. Margaret sat in her chair by the window, staring at the fading sunlight, her mind racing. Hours later, after Daniel had gone upstairs to shower, Emma leaned over the arm of the sofa, her voice low, venom dripping from every word. "You keep quiet, Margaret. If you ever breathe a word about what you saw today, I'll make sure Daniel turns against you. And trust me, he will." Margaret's breath caught in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but Emma's smile widened, daring her. The words stuck in her throat. She went to bed that night with her heart pounding. The walls of the house that once gave her comfort now felt like a prison. Sleep came only in small fragments, each broken by the echo of Emma's words. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. When Margaret stepped outside to fetch the mail, an envelope lay on the porch. It was old, yellowed, with her late husband's handwriting on the front. Her name. She hadn't seen his writing in years. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. How had this letter surfaced now, after so long? She tore it open right there on the porch, her eyes scanning the words. And what she read inside made her knees buckle. Her husband had written instructions about the house. The letter warned of exactly this kind of situation. Margaret clutched the paper to her chest, the words searing into her mind. This house had secrets Emma could never know. But even as relief washed over her, the sound of footsteps made her freeze. Emma stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the letter. "What's that you're holding?" Emma demanded. Margaret's stomach dropped. Her secret wasn't safe anymore. Margaret's fingers clenched the letter so tightly the edges crumpled. She tried to tuck it behind her back, but Emma was already stepping closer, her heels clicking against the wooden porch floor. "I said, what's that you're holding?" Emma's voice was sharper this time, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Margaret swallowed hard. "It's just an old letter from my husband. Nothing important." Emma tilted her head, her lips curling into a cold smile. "Nothing important? Then why are you shaking like that, Margaret?" She took another step forward, her hand reaching out. "Give it to me." Margaret jerked back, clutching the letter to her chest like a lifeline. "No. This is private. It was written for me, not you." For the first time, Emma's fake sweetness shattered. Her eyes darkened, and she hissed through clenched teeth. "You're a stubborn old woman, aren't you? Always clinging to things that don't belong to you anymore." Margaret's knees weakened, but she forced her voice to steady. "This house, these memories, they're mine. You can't take that away." Emma's hand shot out suddenly, snatching at the letter. The two women struggled on the porch, the fragile paper caught between them. Margaret's heart raced. If Emma got hold of it, everything her husband had written, everything he had warned her about, would be exposed. The tug-of-war ended with a sudden rip. The letter tore cleanly in half. Margaret stumbled backward, holding one piece, while Emma clutched the other. Emma's eyes scanned the torn words, her brows furrowed. "What is this?" she whispered. Then louder, "He wrote about the house, didn't he?" Margaret said nothing, her silence louder than any answer. Emma's grip tightened on her half of the letter. "If you think a piece of paper will stop me, you're wrong. This house will be mine, Margaret. One way or another." She stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. Margaret sank onto the porch steps, her breathing ragged. She unfolded her half of the letter with trembling hands, desperate to make sense of what was left. Her late husband's words leapt off the page. "Should anything ever happen, the deed will remain under my name, protected. Do not trust easily, even those closest. The house is safeguarded." The rest was missing, torn away. Tears filled her eyes. What had he meant by safeguarded? And where was the rest of the explanation? She pressed the fragile paper against her chest. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as Emma believed. Maybe her husband had left behind more than memories. Maybe he had left protection. But as Margaret rose to her feet, she caught sight of Emma through the window. Her daughter-in-law was on the phone, speaking in a low, urgent tone. Margaret's stomach turned. Who was she calling? Her instincts told her this was no casual conversation. And then, as Emma turned away from the window, Margaret saw it. Emma was holding the torn half of the letter in her free hand, her eyes scanning it again and again. Whatever Emma had read, it had fueled her determination even more. The battle for the house had only just begun. Margaret could hardly sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made her heart jump. She kept replaying the sight of Emma whispering on the phone, clutching that torn half of the letter as though it were a weapon. The next morning, the sound of a car engine pulling up outside the house jolted her awake. Margaret pulled the curtain back slightly. A black sedan was parked at the curb. The driver stepped out first, a tall man in a dark suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He moved with a confidence that felt out of place in their quiet neighborhood. The back door opened and Emma stepped out. She was dressed sharper than usual, in a fitted blazer and heels, her makeup done as if she were attending a business meeting. She gestured toward the house with a flick of her wrist. Margaret's stomach twisted. Who was this man? She rushed to the front door and cracked it open slightly, trying to listen. Emma's voice carried across the yard. "She's inside. I told you, the deed should already be in her possession. My husband is too sentimental. He would have left it with her. You just need to convince her to hand it over." The man nodded without saying a word. His silence was scarier than any threat. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Convince? What did Emma mean by that? She closed the door softly, her heart hammering in her chest. She needed to think fast. The torn letter was still tucked safely in her nightstand. But what good was half a letter? And what if the man decided to force his way in? For the first time, Margaret realized she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed help. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling over the numbers. She thought of calling her son, but then the memory of his recent distance came rushing back. He had barely visited since marrying Emma. Would he even believe her? Her finger hovered. Then she thought of her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, the widow who lived across the street. A kind woman, always quick to offer help. But Margaret hesitated. If she involved anyone else, they too might get dragged into Emma's schemes. Before she could decide, there was a sharp knock on the front door. Margaret froze. Another knock, louder this time. And then the man's deep voice. "Mrs. Walker, we just need to ask you a few questions about the property. It won't take long." Her blood ran cold. She didn't move. Then from the kitchen, she heard the sound of keys jingling. Margaret's eyes widened. Emma had a spare set of keys. She was letting him in. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. She had only seconds to act. Her eyes darted to the hallway closet, the one with the trapdoor to the old storm cellar her husband had built decades ago. Few people even knew it existed. Clutching her half of the letter, she rushed to the closet, pulled the door shut behind her, and crawled into the darkness of the cellar just as the front door creaked open. From the pitch-black space below, Margaret could hear footsteps echoing through her home. Heavy, deliberate steps. The sound of drawers opening, furniture being moved, and then Emma's voice, sharp and commanding. "Search everything. I know she has it." Margaret pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breathing shallow. For the first time in her life, her own home felt like a prison. And somewhere above her, Emma and the stranger were tearing it apart piece by piece, hunting for the secret Margaret was now the only one left to protect. Margaret crouched in the dark cellar, her palms pressed against the cold dirt floor. Dust tickled her nose, and the musty smell of old wood surrounded her. Above, the heavy footsteps continued, moving from room to room, followed by the sound of Emma's voice barking orders. "Check the bedroom. Tear apart the drawers. She has to be hiding it." Margaret clenched her fists, her breathing ragged. They were hunting her like prey inside her own home. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing against something hard in the dirt. Startled, she pulled back, then felt again. It wasn't just dirt. It was wood. She traced the outline with her fingertips and realized it was a small, hidden box buried beneath the floorboards. Her heart raced. Had her husband hidden something here? Carefully, she dug at the soil with her trembling hands until the box came free. It was old, its hinges rusted, but still intact. Margaret held it close, whispering, "What did you leave me, Henry?" Above her, a loud crash echoed through the house. A drawer was overturned, glass shattered. The man's deep voice followed. "Nothing in here." Emma snapped back. "Keep looking. I know she has it." Margaret's hands shook as she fumbled with the box's tiny clasp. At first, it wouldn't budge. She bit her lip, forcing it open. Inside lay several folded papers, yellowed with age. The first one she pulled out was unmistakable. It was the other half of the torn letter. Her eyes widened. She pressed the two halves together, her breath catching as the words came alive again. The deed will remain under my name, protected. Do not trust easily, even those closest. The house is safeguarded through the lawyer's trust. If you are reading this, remember, this house cannot be transferred without both your signature and proof of the safeguard hidden below. Margaret gasped. A lawyer's trust? A safeguard hidden below? Was this what Emma was desperate to find? She rifled through the rest of the box and found an old brass key, heavy and engraved with a number she didn't recognize. Beneath it was another letter, shorter this time, in Henry's handwriting. If danger comes, use the key. The answer lies in the bank. Before Margaret could take in the meaning, a sudden thud above made her freeze. The cellar door creaked. Someone was opening the closet. Margaret clutched the box to her chest, her body trembling. The dim outline of light from the trap door widened, and she saw a shadow move across it. Emma's voice cut through the silence. Check down there. Margaret's breath stopped. The man's heavy boots creaked on the closet floorboards. A moment later, the trapdoor groaned as it began to open. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. She had seconds, just seconds, to decide whether to stay hidden and risk being found, or run deeper into the cellar's narrow crawl space, where even she hadn't ventured in years. The trapdoor opened wider, dust falling around her. A beam of light sliced into the darkness, landing dangerously close to her feet. Do you see anything? Emma's voice called down. Margaret pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart pounding so hard she feared it would give her away. The man's shadow shifted closer, and then the beam of light hovered just inches from Margaret's trembling hands. Dust motes danced in the glow as the man leaned further down into the cellar, his voice low and steady. Doesn't look like anyone's here, he muttered. Emma's sharp reply followed instantly. Don't just look. Go down there. She's slippery, that old woman. I don't trust her hiding spots. Margaret's heart lurched. She knew she couldn't stay where she was. If the man came down, there would be nowhere left to run. Clutching the box against her chest, she slid silently toward the far corner of the cellar, where the wall dipped into a narrow crawl space. It was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. The ground was cold and damp, cobwebs brushing against her arms as she inched her way forward. She bit back a cough, her whole body trembling. Behind her, the heavy thud of boots echoed as the man climbed down into the cellar. His flashlight beam swept across the walls, landing on old shelves stacked with canned goods and dusty jars. Margaret froze. The light lingered dangerously close, then moved away. See anything? Emma's impatient voice came again from above. Nothing yet, the man replied. His boots scuffed closer, each step pounding like thunder in Margaret's chest. She pressed herself deeper into the crawl space, her breath shallow. The space grew tighter, the air thicker. Just when she thought she could go no further, her hand brushed against something metallic. Confused, she shifted the box under one arm and felt around. It was a latch, a hidden one. Margaret's pulse quickened. She tugged, and with a faint creak, a small wooden panel shifted open. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside, something wrapped carefully in cloth. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped it. To her astonishment, it was a leather-bound book. Her husband's handwriting was scrawled across the cover. House records, private. Margaret's lips parted in disbelief. Was this the safeguard he had written about? Before she could open it, the beam of the flashlight swept dangerously close. The man's boots stopped just feet away from the crawl space. Margaret froze, clutching both the box and the book tight to her chest. The man bent down, angling the light toward the narrow gap. For a horrifying second, Margaret was sure their eyes met. But then, I told you it's empty, the man called back up. Just old junk down here. Emma groaned in frustration. Fine, get back up here. She must have hidden it somewhere else. Margaret's knees almost buckled with relief as the footsteps retreated, the beam of light disappearing. The cellar door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness again. For several long minutes, she didn't move, afraid it might all be a trick. But when silence settled over the house once more, she finally allowed herself a shaky breath. Carefully, she opened the book. The pages inside were filled with her husband's detailed notes, records of the house, legal documents, even letters from a lawyer. And at the very back, tucked into a small pocket, was a sealed envelope with her name written across it. Margaret's fingers hovered over it, her heart pounding. Whatever was inside this envelope could explain everything, and possibly hold the key to keeping her home safe. But just as she slipped it free, a loud bang echoed upstairs, followed by Emma's furious shout. "She's still here! I know she is!" Margaret's blood ran cold. Emma wasn't giving up. If she found the cellar again, there would be no second escape. Margaret clutched the sealed envelope, her hands trembling so badly she could hardly tear it open. She pressed her ear to the floorboards above. Heavy footsteps moved back and forth, and Emma's voice cut through like a knife. "She's in this house somewhere. I can feel it. Don't just stand there. Block the exits. She's not leaving until I have that deed." Margaret's heart pounded. The man's deeper voice followed, calm but firm. "If she's hiding, we'll smoke her out." Smoke her out? Her blood ran cold. Shaking, she broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter. Her husband's familiar handwriting leapt off the page. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then you know the house is in danger. I've protected it by law. The deed cannot be claimed without your signature, nor can it be sold without the documents hidden with this book. If ever someone tries to force you, go to First Trust Bank with the brass key. Inside the vault, you'll find the final safeguard. And Margaret, never trust those who claim to love but act with greed. Remember, this home is yours." Her eyes blurred with tears. Relief flooded her chest, but it was quickly replaced by terror as the smell of smoke drifted faintly into the cellar. She lifted her head, sniffing the air. It was faint at first, then stronger. Acrid. Bitter. Emma's voice, muffled but distinct, carried through the floorboards. "Light the papers in the fireplace. If she's hiding, the smoke will drive her out." Margaret gasped. They were really doing it. Her safe hiding place was about to become a trap. Panic surged through her veins. She stuffed the letter and the brass key into the hidden book, holding it tight against her chest. She had to get out. But how? Her eyes darted around the crawl space. The air was already growing warmer, smoke trickling in through tiny cracks in the wood. Her lungs burned as she coughed quietly, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Then she remembered something. Years ago, her husband had built a second escape tunnel from the cellar, a narrow shaft that led to the back garden. He'd said it was just in case of emergencies. She hadn't thought about it in decades. Dropping to her hands and knees, she crawled toward the farthest corner of the crawl space. Her fingers searched along the wall until, yes, they found the faint outline of a wooden hatch. But it was stiff, sealed with years of dirt and neglect. She pushed with all her strength, her arms trembling. Nothing. She shoved again, harder, her chest tightening as smoke filled the air. The wood finally gave with a loud crack, sending dirt and roots tumbling down. A thin sliver of daylight shone through. But above her, the sound of footsteps grew closer again. Emma's heels clicked against the wooden floor, right above the closet. "Check down there again," Emma snapped. "The old woman can't stay hidden forever." Margaret's heart leapt to her throat. If they opened the trapdoor now, they'd see the smoke and know she was still below, and she wasn't sure if she'd make it out in time. Martha's body trembled as she clutched the doorframe for support. She could not believe what she was hearing. The whispers from the corner of the room grew louder. Her daughter-in-law was no longer just whispering to herself. She was speaking to someone on the phone. "Yes, she's too weak to resist. By tomorrow, the deed will be ours. Once she signs, everything she owns becomes mine. her daughter-in-law said in a cold, calculating voice. Martha's knees almost gave way. Ours? Mine? The words stabbed her like knives. But then, a new voice on the other end of the phone leaked through the speaker. It was a man's voice, rough, deep, commanding. You must not fail this time. Do you understand? The house is the last piece. Without it, everything we've worked for falls apart. If she resists, make her regret it. Martha's heart stopped. Who was this man? Why was he so invested in her home? She stepped back, trying not to make a sound, but the floor betrayed her. A creak, a single groan from the old wooden floorboard. Her daughter-in-law froze. Slowly, she turned her head toward the doorway, their eyes locked. For a moment, silence filled the room, so heavy it could crush the air itself. Then, with a voice dripping with venom, her daughter-in-law said, "How much did you hear?" Martha's lips parted, but no words came out. The air felt thick, her throat dry. The younger woman stood, her eyes dark, her smile faint but chilling. She tucked the phone into her pocket and took a step forward. "You should have stayed asleep," she whispered. Martha stumbled back into the hallway, but before she could retreat further, her daughter-in-law lunged, grabbing her wrist with a strength that didn't belong to someone her size. Martha gasped, her body pinned against the wall. The young woman leaned close, her breath hot against her cheek. "You think this house is yours? You think you'll die in peace here? No. This house is mine, and I'll take it, whether you hand it over willingly or not." Martha felt her world closing in. The house that had been her safe haven, the walls that had once given her comfort, now felt like a prison. But as her daughter-in-law tightened her grip, something in Martha shifted, a flicker of resolve. She wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. And deep inside, she knew. This was only the beginning. The grip on Martha's wrist tightened until she winced in pain. Her daughter-in-law's nails dug into her skin, sharp enough to leave marks. "Listen to me, old woman," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You've lived long enough in this house. It's time you hand it over to someone who knows what to do with it. Sign the deed tomorrow. No excuses." Martha's chest heaved as her heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but fear choked her. Then, with shocking suddenness, her daughter-in-law released her wrist and stepped back, straightening her posture. Her face transformed in an instant, from fury to a sweet, innocent smile. "Good night, Mama," she said in the gentlest tone, as though nothing had just happened. She turned, walked calmly back into the room and shut the door. The click of the lock echoed in the hallway like the sound of a judge's gavel. Martha leaned against the wall, her body trembling, her breath shallow. She glanced down at her wrist and saw the red marks, proof of what had just happened, proof that this wasn't a nightmare. She staggered toward her room, but when she reached the doorway, something caught her eye. The landline phone on the small wooden table. It hadn't rung in days, but now... The voicemail light blinked. Slowly, steadily. Curiosity gnawed at her. With shaking hands, she pressed the button. A male voice came through the machine. The same rough, commanding voice she had heard on her daughter-in-law's phone earlier. "This is your last chance," the voice said. "Tomorrow you get her signature. If not, we do it my way." The message ended. Martha dropped the phone back into its cradle, her hands trembling so violently she could barely stand. The blood drained from her face. Who was this man? Why was he after her house? And what did he mean by his way? Her knees buckled and she sat heavily on the edge of her bed. For the first time in years, the house she had built with her husband no longer felt safe. The walls seemed to whisper secrets. The shadows stretched longer than they should, and every creak in the wood made her heart race. Something terrible was coming, and she was trapped in the middle of it. Martha didn't sleep that night. Her body lay on the bed, but her spirit was restless, her eyes glued to the ceiling as her thoughts circled like vultures over the same questions. Who was that man on the voicemail? Why did her daughter-in-law want the deed so badly? And what was the meaning of, "We'll do it my way"? Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The tick of the old wall clock was deafening. The wind outside rattled the shutters like someone trying to force their way in. She clutched her blanket tighter, whispering a prayer for strength. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilled into her room, but it brought no comfort. The kitchen echoed with clattering dishes, and Martha's stomach twisted. She knew her daughter-in-law was waiting for her. She forced herself to rise, straightened her nightgown, and walked slowly down the hall. As she stepped into the kitchen, she froze. Her daughter-in-law sat at the table, her hair neatly tied, a steaming cup of coffee before her. But what made Martha's breath hitch was not her daughter-in-law's cold stare. It was the man seated across from her. A tall figure, dressed in a dark coat, his hands folded on the table. His face was partly hidden by the brim of his hat, but his presence filled the room with something heavy, something dangerous. Martha's heart stopped. She recognized the voice before he even spoke. "So," the man said calmly, his eyes lifting to meet hers, "this must be Martha, the woman who's been holding on to something that doesn't belong to her." Martha gripped the doorway to steady herself. Her daughter-in-law smirked, her lips curving as if victory were already hers. "Mama," she said softly, almost sweetly, "this is Mr. Carter. He's here to help us finish this matter quickly." Martha's throat tightened. She wanted to ask who he was, why he cared about her house, but the words wouldn't come. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, studying her like a hawk sizing up its prey. Then, in a voice that sent chills down her spine, he said, "You will sign the deed today." The silence that followed was suffocating. Martha's chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting from her daughter-in-law to the stranger at her kitchen table. But then, without warning, a knock thundered at the front door. Loud, forceful. All three of them froze. Her daughter-in-law's face went pale. Mr. Carter's jaw tightened. And Martha. Martha clung to the doorframe, her heart pounding with both fear and a spark of hope. Because whoever was at that door had just interrupted the most dangerous moment of her life. But who was it? A neighbor? A stranger? Or someone who finally knew the truth? The knock came again, harder this time, echoing through every wall of the house. Martha's breath hitched. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her daughter-in-law shot a panicked glance at Mr. Carter, but he didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, his hand curling into a fist on the table. "Stay quiet," he muttered, his voice low but sharp. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, quicker, until it sounded less like knocking and more like pounding. Whoever stood outside wasn't going away. Martha's daughter-in-law stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tiled floor. She tried to compose herself, forcing a smile that looked almost painful. I'll get it," she whispered. But before she could reach the door, a voice thundered from the other side. "Open up! This is Officer Daniels with the police." Martha's eyes widened, her heart skipping a beat. The police? Here? How did they know? Mr. Carter rose slowly to his feet, his expression darkening like a storm cloud. His voice dropped into a dangerous calm. "Don't let them in." Her daughter-in-law froze mid-step, torn between obeying him and the commanding voice outside. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling. The pounding continued. "Mrs. Thompson, we know you're inside. Open this door immediately." Martha's knees weakened. They knew her name. They weren't here by accident. Mr. Carter moved closer to the front door, his eyes burning with calculation. He turned to her daughter-in-law and hissed, "If you open that door, everything falls apart." But then his gaze slid to Martha, cold, unyielding. "You say one word, old woman," he growled, "and you'll regret it." Martha's throat tightened. Her body shook, but deep inside something stirred. A flicker of courage. A whisper of her husband's voice reminding her, "This house is your legacy. Don't let them take it." Another crash rattled the door, this time harder, as if the police were preparing to break it down. And in that split second, every eye in the room turned to Martha. Would she remain silent, bowing to fear? Or would she open her mouth and risk everything? The air was electric, heavy with the weight of her choice. Her lips parted. And then, the front door burst open. The front door burst open with a deafening crash, the wood splintering as two uniformed officers stormed into the house. Their guns were drawn, their eyes sharp, their presence like a shield breaking through the darkness that had hung over Martha for weeks. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" one officer barked. Her daughter-in-law gasped, stumbling backward, her hands flying into the air. The smirk she had worn just hours before had vanished, replaced with sheer terror. Mr. Carter didn't move at first. He stood tall, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold as stone. But when one of the officers stepped forward, his gun steady, Carter raised his hands slowly, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "You don't know what you're getting into," he muttered. The officers ignored him, moving quickly to secure his wrists in steel handcuffs. The clink of metal rang through the room like the sound of chains breaking, and Martha felt her knees buckle with relief. "Mrs. Thompson," one officer said gently, turning to her, "you're safe now. We've been following this man and your daughter-in-law for months. They've been targeting elderly homeowners in this area, tricking them into signing over their properties. But you were brave. You held out. You gave us the time we needed." Martha's chest heaved, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't even believe it was over. Her daughter-in-law sobbed as the second officer pulled her hands behind her back. "Mama, I didn't mean it. I was scared. Please, you have to believe me." Martha stared at her, her face pale but steady. 1,000 memories of shared dinners, warm hugs, and kind words flashed through her mind. But they were drowned out by the sting of that slap, the pain in her wrist, and the betrayal in her heart. "No," Martha whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "You chose this, and now you must face the cost." Her daughter-in-law's cries echoed as she was led away, but Martha didn't look back, her eyes fixed on the morning light streaming through the broken doorway. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house was hers again. Truly hers. The officers offered to stay with her until the repairs were done, but Martha shook her head. She stepped into her living room, running her hand across the old photographs of her husband, her children, her grandchildren. A deep calm washed over her. She had fought for her home, her legacy, and her dignity, and she had won. As the last squad car pulled away and silence returned to the street, Martha closed the door gently behind her. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like home again. She stood in the middle of her living room, wiped the last tear from her cheek, and whispered into the quiet air, "I kept my promise, John. Our home is safe." And with that, Martha sat in her favorite chair by the window, sunlight warming her face, her heart finally at peace. The battle was over. The house was hers. And her story would be remembered.